"Don't even think about showing up to the graduation," my dad snapped. "You'll ruin the photos. Sarah deserves better," in her background. I just smiled, transferred the celebration fund back to my account, and sent him a screenshot. That was just step one. They still don't know I own the venue they bragged about. I, 32M, never thought I'd be writing this, but here we are. 3 months ago, my world turned upside down when my dad called me about my sister Sarah's graduation. He told me not to even think about showing up because I'd ruined the photos, that Sarah deserved better in her background. The words hit like a sledgehammer, but I just smiled and said I understood. What my family doesn't know is that I've been quietly building something they never saw coming. Let me back up. Growing up, I was always the black sheep. Sarah was the golden child, straight A's, perfect boyfriend, headed to medical school. I dropped out of college to start my own business, which my parents saw as a complete failure. They never missed a chance to remind me how disappointed they were, how I was wasting my potential while Sarah was making them proud. For years, I tried to prove myself. My business started small, buying and flipping properties, but it grew steadily. I kept my success quiet, partly because I'm private by nature, partly because every time I mentioned doing well, my dad would find ways to minimize it or change the subject back to Sarah's achievements. When Sarah got into medical school 2 years ago, my parents were over the moon. They immediately started planning this massive graduation celebration, talking about renting some fancy venue downtown. I offered to help with costs, thinking maybe this would be my chance to show them I'd made something of myself. My dad brushed me off, saying they had it handled and didn't need my drug money, his charming way of referring to my legitimate real estate business. But I kept pushing. Last year, I quietly transferred $50,000 into a joint account I shared with my dad for family emergencies. I told him it was for Sarah's graduation celebration, that I wanted to contribute something meaningful. He seemed surprised but accepted it, though he made sure to mention that Sarah's boyfriend's family was also contributing and that their money was clean. The venue they chose was the Meridian Event Center downtown. This gorgeous historic building with crystal chandeliers and marble floors. They bragged about booking it for months, posting pictures on social media, telling everyone how exclusive and expensive it was. Sarah was thrilled, my mom was in planning heaven, and my dad kept mentioning how much it cost like it was some badge of honor. What they didn't know was that I'd been watching the Meridian for 3 years. The previous owner was struggling financially, and I'd been in quiet negotiations to purchase it. 2 months before Sarah's graduation, the deal finally closed. I became the owner of the venue they'd been bragging about, but I kept it completely under wraps. Then came that phone call 3 months ago. My dad's voice was cold and matter-of-fact when he told me not to come to the graduation ceremony or the party afterward. He said my presence would ruin the photos, that Sarah deserved better than having me in the background of her special day. He mentioned my tattoos, my casual style, how I didn't fit the image they wanted to project to Sarah's medical school friends and her boyfriend's family. I sat there listening, feeling that familiar sting of rejection, but something was different this time. Instead of anger or hurt, I felt this strange calm wash over me. I told him I understood completely and hung up. Then I opened my banking app, transferred the $50,000 back to my personal account, and took a screenshot showing the transaction. I sent it to my dad with a simple message. Since I won't be attending, figured you wouldn't need my contribution. Good luck with the venue costs. His response came within minutes. He called me selfish and petty, said I was trying to sabotage Sarah's day out of jealousy. He told me the money had already been spent on deposits and planning, that I couldn't just pull out now. I simply replied that he'd made it clear I wasn't family enough to attend, so I wasn't family enough to pay either. That was step 1. Step 2 began the next morning when I called my property manager at the Meridian. I instructed him to review all upcoming bookings and flag any that seemed problematic or violated our new policies. Funny thing about venue contracts, they're usually pretty strict about payment schedules and terms. My dad had put down a deposit months earlier, but the balance was due 30 days before the event. With my $50,000 gone, they were scrambling to cover costs. I watched through my property manager as they missed the first payment deadline, then the second. According to the contract, this gave the venue grounds to cancel the booking. But I didn't cancel it. Not yet. Instead, I had my manager reach out with a generous offer. Since they were valued clients, the venue would be willing to work with them on a payment plan, but it would require a guarantor with significant assets to co-sign. The irony was delicious. They needed exactly the kind of financial backing I could provide, but they'd made it clear they didn't want me involved. I watched my dad scramble for weeks, trying to secure loans, asking relatives for money, even reaching out to Sarah's boyfriend's family for additional help. Sarah started getting stressed about the party, worried they might have to downgrade to a smaller venue. My mom was frantically calling other places, but everything decent was already booked. Meanwhile, I was having the time of my life. Every few days, I'd get updates from my property manager about their increasingly desperate attempts to secure payment. They tried negotiating lower rates, asked about switching to a smaller room, even proposed moving the date. Each time, my manager would politely explain that the contract terms were firm. 2 weeks before the graduation, my dad finally swallowed his pride and called me. He didn't apologize for uninviting me, but he asked if I could help with the venue costs. He tried to frame it as a loan, promising to pay me back with interest. I told him I'd think about it, and hung up. I didn't call back. 1 week before graduation, they received the cancellation notice. The venue regretfully informed them that due to continued non-payment, the booking was being terminated. They had 72 hours to remove any personal items they'd stored there for the party. My phone exploded with calls and texts. Sarah was crying, my mom was furious, and my dad was alternating between rage and desperation. He called me every name in the book, accused me of sabotaging the family, said I was destroying Sarah's special day out of spite. I let them stew for 24 hours. Then I called my dad back. I told him I'd heard about their venue troubles and that I might be able to help. I explained that I had some connections in the event industry and could possibly arrange something, but it would cost them. Not money, something more valuable. I wanted a public apology, not just to me, but posted on the same social media accounts where they'd been bragging about the venue and talking about Sarah's perfect day. I wanted him to admit that he'd treated me unfairly, that he'd judged me without knowing the full story of my success, and that he was wrong to exclude me from family events. The silence on the other end of the phone stretched for a full minute. He asked what kind of venue I could arrange. I told him not to worry about the details, just that it would be even better than the Meridian. He wanted to know how much it would cost, and I repeated that the price wasn't money. Another long silence. Finally, he agreed. That evening, my dad posted a long message on Facebook. He admitted that he'd been wrong about my career, that he'd let his own prejudices cloud his judgment about my success. He apologized for excluding me from family events and acknowledged that I'd built something impressive that he'd been too stubborn to see. He tagged me in the post and said he hoped I'd reconsider attending Sarah's graduation celebration. The post got dozens of comments from family and friends, many expressing surprise at the revelation. Several people mentioned they'd always wondered why I never came to family events anymore. The next morning, I called him back. I told him the venue situation was handled, that they could proceed with their original plans. The Meridian would honor their booking, and all previous payment issues had been resolved. He was confused but relieved. He asked how I'd managed to arrange it, what connections I'd used. I told him not to worry about it, just to focus on celebrating Sarah. Update 1. The graduation ceremony went perfectly. I showed up in a tailored suit, clean-shaven, looking every bit the successful businessman I'd become. Sarah was genuinely happy to see me, and even my mom seemed pleased that I'd made an effort with my appearance. But the real moment came at the party that evening. The Meridian looked spectacular. My staff had outdone themselves with the decorations, the catering was flawless, and everything ran like clockwork. My dad kept commenting on how smoothly everything was going, how professional the service was. About halfway through the evening, during the speeches, I asked for the microphone. I congratulated Sarah on her achievement and talked about how proud I was of her dedication. Then I thanked my parents for teaching me the value of hard work and perseverance. And then I dropped the bomb. I told the room that I had a confession to make. I explained that I'd wanted to contribute something special to Sarah's celebration, something that would show how much her success meant to me. So I decided to give her a gift that would make this night truly memorable. I announced that I was the owner of the Meridian Event Center. The room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop. I explained that I'd purchased the venue 2 months ago as an investment property, and that when I learned they'd chosen it for Sarah's party, I couldn't think of a better way to celebrate her achievement than by hosting her here myself. The applause started slowly, then built to a roar. People were looking around in amazement. realizing they were partying in a venue owned by the family member who'd almost been excluded from the event. My dad's face went through about 6 different emotions in 10 seconds. Shock, confusion, realization, embarrassment, and finally something that might have been pride. Sarah hugged me so hard I thought she might crack my ribs. She whispered that she couldn't believe I'd done all this for her, that she'd had no idea I was so successful. But the best part was watching my dad process everything. He kept looking around the room, seeing his son's property, his son's staff, his son's investment. The venue he'd been bragging about for months belonged to the family member he'd tried to exclude. Update 2. The aftermath has been interesting, to say the least. My dad and I had a long conversation the week after graduation. He admitted that he'd been wrong about my career, that he'd let his own traditional ideas about success blind him to what I'd actually accomplished. He said he'd been so focused on conventional achievements like degrees and corporate jobs that he'd failed to recognize entrepreneurial success. He also acknowledged that the way he'd handled the graduation invitation was cruel and unfair. He explained that he'd been worried about appearances, about what Sarah's medical school friends and her boyfriend's wealthy family would think. He'd been embarrassed by what he saw as my unconventional lifestyle and had made the terrible decision to exclude me rather than risk judgment. It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was honest. Sarah and I have grown closer than we've been in years. She started asking me for business advice and has expressed interest in real estate investing as a way to build wealth alongside her medical career. She's also made it clear to our parents that any future family events must include me, or she won't attend either. My mom took longer to come around, but she eventually admitted that she'd been influenced by my dad's attitude and had made assumptions about my lifestyle without really understanding my business. She started bragging about my success to her friends, which is both gratifying and slightly annoying. The real change, though, has been in how the extended family treats me. Word spread quickly about the venue revelation, and suddenly cousins and aunts who'd barely acknowledged me for years were reaching out. Some wanted investment advice, others were just curious about my business, but the shift in respect was unmistakable. I've also started getting referrals for property deals from family connections, which has been an unexpected bonus. Turns out, when people know you're successful rather than just assuming you're a failure, they're much more willing to do business with you. Update 3. 6 months later, things have settled into a new normal, but the changes have been lasting. My dad and I now have regular conversations about business and investments. He's even started asking my advice on his retirement planning, which would have been unthinkable a year ago. He's also made an effort to include me in family decisions and has stopped making dismissive comments about my career. Sarah graduated medical school with honors and has started her residency. She's also begun investing in real estate with my guidance, using her signing bonus to purchase her first rental property. She jokes that she's going to be a doctor landlord, but she's serious about building wealth outside of medicine. The Meridian has become one of my most profitable properties. The publicity from Sarah's graduation party led to a surge in bookings, and I've raised the rates significantly. It's funny how a venue becomes more desirable when people know it's owned by someone successful rather than just managed by a company. I've also expanded my portfolio significantly over the past year. The confidence boost from finally being recognized by my family translated into bolder business moves, and I've acquired 3 more commercial properties and a small apartment complex. But the most satisfying change has been the shift in family dynamics. I'm no longer the black sheep who gets excluded from events. I'm the successful son who owns the venues where we celebrate milestones. When my cousin got engaged last month, the first question was whether I could host the wedding at one of my properties. The irony isn't lost on me. For years, I tried to prove my worth through quiet success, hoping they'd eventually notice and appreciate what I'd built. It took a dramatic revelation and a bit of calculated revenge to finally get the recognition I'd been seeking. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if my dad had simply invited me to the graduation like any normal parent would. Would I have ever revealed my ownership of the venue? Would our relationship have improved naturally over time? But then I remember the look on his face when he realized that the venue he'd been bragging about belonged to the son he'd tried to exclude. That moment of recognition, of understanding that he'd completely misjudged me, was worth every bit of the elaborate setup. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but sometimes it's even better when it's served with a side of family reconciliation and a healthy dose of poetic justice. My dad learned that success comes in many forms, and I learned that sometimes you have to make people see your worth rather than waiting for them to notice it on their own. The best part? Sarah still doesn't know about the payment drama that almost canceled her party. As far as she knows, I simply wanted to surprise her with a beautiful venue. Some secrets are worth keeping, especially when they preserve the happiness of people you love. These days, when my dad introduces me to people, he doesn't mention my tattoos or my unconventional path. He talks about my business acumen and my property portfolio. It's a small change, but it represents a fundamental shift in how he sees me. And every time I walk through the meridian, I smile remembering the day I turned their rejection into the foundation for a new chapter in our family story.